Good afternoon. Woo, there. The mic's on now. Welcome. I'd like to begin with a story. I was on the phone with a friend of mine who works for a Fortune 500 company. It's a SOA architect. Any SOA architects in the room? Any? Got to be a few. Yeah. Still want to have your name associated with SOA. Stay with me. And I was asking him, how many developers do you have at your company? Now, this is not a company, the person I was talking to is not at a company that you'd expect to have a lot of developers. But I was trying to figure out what's the order, the big O, if you will, complexity of the problem he was dealing with respect to identity. And I was going to try to measure it in terms of the number of developers that were under this person's purview. And he began to give me some surprising numbers. He said, well, let's see. I've got 1,000 full-time employee developers, and I've got 1,000 offshore developers, and I have 1,000 contract developers. So I have 3,000 developers, and none of them are experts in identity, and none of them really want to spend any time on it at all. But all of them have to spend time on it. And not only that, they're all working on different projects and different parts, far-flung throughout the company. And I, as the architect, have to figure out how I'm going to guide all of these developers to do the right thing with respect to security, with respect to compliance, with respect to audit, so that we can all be going in the same direction. And as he's talking about this, and he's talking about all these different technologies he has to choose from, in all of these different scenarios, is it an extranet app? Is it an intranet app? Am I going to use Kerberos? Am I going to use SAML? Am I going to use X509? Should it be names and passwords? Are they consumers? Are they employees? All these different things. And I'm imagining, as he's speaking, this guidance that he's going to create. It's probably a document on the order of 50, 100 pages with this complex decision tree. If you're doing this, then do this, then do this. And I'm thinking, wow, there is something seriously deficient in this scenario. Now, what's the answer? What is the answer to all problems in computer science? This statement has been attributed to Butler Lamson. I believe he's attributed to a fellow named David Wheeler, a professor of computer science. The solution to all problems in computer science is to add one more layer of indirection. That layer of indirection for identity is what we call the identity metasystem. More concretely, the programming model is this thing we call the claims-based identity model. My name is Stuart Kwan. I am the group program manager of the Federated Identity team. This afternoon, myself and my friend Caleb are going to show you how to build applications using this claims-based programming model, using the Geneva server and the Geneva framework that you might have heard about earlier today if you went to Kim Cameron's presentation. Kim talked about a wide variety of software and services that all align to this model for identity so that developers only have to think about one thing. You only have to think about one thing, programming to claims. And then it's up to the IT pros or whoever it is that deploys your application to decide what the claims source is going to be. And I'm going to go through the theory of that. So if you missed Kim's presentation this morning, we'll do a little bit of a primer to begin. So we'll be focusing amongst these components specifically on the Geneva framework, formerly called Zermatt. If you'd seen that, we had a beta of a claims-based identity framework. We called it Zermatt. We love all these cities in the approximate region in Europe. We moved to Geneva. We like it there too. We're building a server and a client that align with this model. We'll start with that basic concepts. How does this work? How do the pieces fit together? Just so you have a feel for the theory of the claims-based model. We will show you a demonstration, a progressive demonstration, that builds an application starting with nothing but an ordinary ASP.NET app, going all the way through 5 different use cases that are common challenges that face people as they build applications today with respect to identity. And then finally, I'm going to tell you how you can get it, where you can get it, and when you'll finally be able to get the RTM bits. Okay, what is a claim? There's a very specific reason why we chose the word claim. Kim talked about it this morning. a statement about which there is some doubt. Another thing that Butler likes to say is all trust is local. All trust decisions are made by the application. They're not made anywhere else. So a claim is some statement made by one subject about another, about which there is some doubt. You can take it or leave it. You can do with it as you see fit, based on your position with respect to the identity providers and what your application is doing. These claims are meant to be anything about a user or a subject. It doesn't just have to be an identifier like my email is squan@microsoft.com or my username is squan. It can be I'm over 21. I'm a Canadian citizen. If you haven't been able to tell already, I'm pretty sure I said out or about at least once. So far, I'm pretty sure the language barrier won't be a problem, but please bear with me. A characteristic, it could be my photo. It could be any of those things about me. These things are served up in signed documents that we call security tokens. Security tokens are provided by a security token server. I'll show you how this fits in the model, but it is the essence of the level of indirection is the security token server. The metasystem defines the protocols for which we exchange claims, and a claims-aware application that we're going to build today is one that uses claims to drive its behavior. Let's take a look at the essential model. I have a client that wants to access a service of some sort and a security token server. The very first thing that we need to do is introduce the application to the security token server and introduce the security token server to the application. We're going to do that through a handshake that is an exchange of metadata. Hi, I'm the application. Here are the claims I need, and here is my certificate that represents me if you need to sign something to me. In the same direction, we go over to the security token server, and we say, I see this is the application, the claims it needs, the certificate, and now we've created a handshake. Now the two parties know about each other. We call that the trust relationship. Now when the user goes to visit the application, the first thing they need to do is find out, well, what claims do I need to access the application, and where do I need to get them from? Once it's found that out, it needs to go talk to the security token service to get that information. The next thing it does, and here's the symmetry in the system, is it's actually going to go, well, I need a security token from the security token server. The first thing I need to do is find out, what does the security token server need from me so that I can get a security token from it? The basic pattern of the security token server, and you'll see this throughout the presentation, is I feed a token in one side, I get another token out the other side. And that simple pattern, very, very simple, gives us the level of indirection. I can now do interesting things like exchange one token, say my Kerberos ticket. I've logged on. Now I would like another token for another system. Or here's a name and password, and I get another token back, maybe a SAML token, maybe a Kerberos ticket. The essential pattern is token in, token out, and a transformation that happens during that exchange. But first, I need to find out what I need to do to get a token. I do that. After I've done that, I can actually get a token with claims in it and then send it along to the application. That's the essential model. You've probably seen this before. There are probably many people in the room here who are security experts, and you're looking at this and going, wait a minute, I've seen this before. It's called, name your favorite protocol. Kerberos does exactly the same thing. What's so different about this? Well, there are a couple of things here that are subtly different, incrementally different. The policy-driven nature of this, the negotiation-driven nature of this is new. Other identity protocols don't have this idea of I can find out what I need to send and then I can go get it. This set of protocols as well, which are embodied, by the way, in the standards of WS Trust and WS Federation, are what we call token independent. I can transfer all kinds of different tokens inside this mechanism because the protocol itself was designed to be token agnostic, which gives me a lot of flexibility. Some applications might want some tokens with certain capabilities, others want others. That's fine. We can embody that inside this protocol. Okay, what are the pieces that we deliver? The Geneva framework is the claims framework living inside the application that is going to take care of all the protocol dance here. Get the tokens out, deserialize them, get the claims out, send those to the app. The application writer does not want to think about that. We want you not to have to. We just want you to operate on claims. That's the essential abstraction. The Geneva framework is our framework for .NET to do that. The Geneva server is our security token service. It's integrated with Active Directory so that you can take the wide variety of customers who've deployed Active Directory today, insert this in their system, and now they can be a claims provider extracting information from Active Directory to put in those claims. And that is our system, our components that fit into this system. Now, I was talking about the STS as being the key flexibility point here. We have taken the heavy lifting with respect to identity. We've lifted it up out of where, in many cases today, it lives inside the application. How do I get information about the user? How do I authenticate the user? We're going to take that and we're going to move it over to the STS. And now, when you're writing the application, you don't have to think about things like, well, I need the user's email address. I don't get that when they just Kerberos authenticate to me if I'm using Windows Integrated Authentication, for example. I don't get that. I'm going to have to go find it somewhere. And that's actually not a trivial thing to do. Regardless if you're writing an application, well, maybe you know it's an Active Directory. Maybe you don't. But in this model, you can know the security token server is going to send it to you, and the security token server is in charge of figuring out where to go get that information, be it the email address, whether the user's a full-time employee, are they a manager, what's their picture. All these things become the domain of the security token server and out of the application code. Now that the application is one step removed from the actual identity technology, it's no longer bound by that technology and no longer bound to the constraints of that technology. For example, you might have built an application in the past that used Kerberos, and then tomorrow, requirements change. I need users who are from my partners to be able to come access that application. But I'm not really sure how to do that with Kerberos. Most people don't. Some people do, but most people don't set up Kerberos trusts over the internet. So how am I going to make that work? But the application's too late. The assumptions are baked in. In this case, the only assumptions we want you to make are about claims. And then the STS will take care of getting those claims to you. All right, you ready to see it? Yeah. Yes? All right. I'm very excited, by the way. It's been a long road getting to this day. It's day one. And we're very proud to show you this. We're going to start with an ordinary ASP.NET web application with no claims or anything in it. The very first thing we need to do is wire it up to a security token service. Then we're plugged into the model. And once we're plugged into the model, we'll show you how you can take that application and get information about the user without having to look it up anywhere. Not going to look in any databases, directories. It's all going to be right there when the application is running. We're going to enable access by partner users by setting up federation without writing a single line of code, you'll see. We're going to show access to a back-end web service. I've come to the front end, and now I want to access a back end, and I want to do that preserving the user's identity through the call. We call this identity delegation, the problem. Anybody have that? Anybody? Anybody want to know? Yeah, this is going to be cool. And we're going to turn on strong authentication for this application. Now, it would be really easy if we just said, you know, we'll just blanket. If you want to get into the app, you got to show me a certificate or something. But we're not going to do that. We're going to make this one extra hard. We're going to make it so that only certain parts of the application need you to be strongly authenticated, and you're only going to be allowed into those parts if you've previously strongly authenticated. We'll do this with our good friend Contoso, the Contoso hybrid company that builds hybrid car parts. Terry Earls will be the first actor we look into. Terry is an inventory supervisor at Contoso Hybrid, and he's going to be using the Auto Parts web application. And now I would like to welcome up Caleb Baker to show us this demo. Please welcome Caleb.
All right, thanks a lot. So yeah, my name is Caleb Baker. I'm a senior software development in test at Microsoft. and I work on Geneva and Geneva products. Particularly what I'm looking at is like the end-to-end scenarios and how all these products fit together in order to deliver what all of you need. So really, any feedback you have is welcome. This is still just a beta, so I'd like to take anything you have back to the product team, talk to them about scenarios. But let's get started. So first, we have the Contoso Hybrid Inventory application. This is just a standard ASP.NET application that's in the Contoso environment. It's protected by integrated auth. And here it is. So you can see up in the upper right, there's a welcome message for Terry. And in the upper left, it's saying that Terry has administrative privileges. This is letting Terry do things like update the inventory items. All right, so now you have an idea of the application. Let's look at the code. The first bit of the code is customizing that welcome message. It's just calling iPrincipal, iIdentity, name. If you've written ASP.NET applications, you've probably done this before. The role message is calling the isEnroll off of the iPrincipal object. But that's only the customization of the web page. We actually want to have security on our web page as well. So we're using principal permission, which is checking to make sure that the user has the purchaser role. All right, all standard ASP.NET stuff. So let's switch this over so that we can take advantage of the STS that's been deployed in the environment. This is just a single STS that the Contoso IT admin is deployed. It can service a lot of applications. There's no need to put up an STS for each application in the environment. I'm going to register the app by using fedutil, which is a really cool tool that we're excited about that's shipping in the SDK. Eventually, it might be part of Visual Studio. And you can see some add in there. But since it's not, I have to select the project that I'm working on. So this is the web config file. The only change that's going to be made to the existing application is updating this web config file with the includes for the Geneva framework, as well as information about the security token service that it'll be using. All right, and next, I'm going to enter the URL of our web application so the security token service will know where to post the token to. And I'm going to select a certificate which will be used for encrypting the token that's returned from the security token service. All right, so now we have all this information about the application configured. The next thing to do is to gather information about the security token service that we'll be using. What I have here is a URL to some metadata that describes the security token service. This endpoint's exposed by default with Geneva Server, and it has information like the signing certificate the STS will use, the claims that it'll offer, and the endpoints for the security token service. All right, so here's the claims that are going to be offered. I want to do some customization, so I'm going to select last name, name, UPN, given name, email address. But I'd also like to keep the functionality around the isEnroll, so I'm going to request the role claim. And that's it. So that also creates a metadata document for the application, which we'll use later to set up the trust on the STS side. One more bit of configuration I need to do here is to change the authentication on the web app. Right now it was set up for Windows authentication. I'm going to disable that and enable anonymous authentication. This is kind of like in IIS 6 when you had to enable anonymous authentication for Forms Auth. And this allows the authentication module that comes with the Geneva framework to protect the page. All right, so now I'm going to switch over to our Contoso STS server machine and put on my admin hat. So that's everything that needs to be done on the web application side. Okay, so this is the Geneva Server Management Console. On the Relying Parties node, I can add a new Relying Party. And this is how I configure policy for an application. The application is the Relying Party, since it relies on a token that this STS will produce. You can enter the metadata URL for our application, where it's going to get that certificate that we configured, where the endpoint is, and what the claims are that it's asking for. This is just to give a friendly name so that when I manage policy within the console, I can identify it. Okay, so I can see the claims that the application developer wants, and particularly that they want the role claim. So later on, I'm going to have to do a little bit of config to hook that up, because what the application developer really wants is the role claim to have the values of the Active Directory groups that the user is a member of to maintain that functionality. So I can commit the policy, and then go back and add a policy update so I can support that role claim as the application developer wants. So the application developer doesn't have to make code changes on their side. I'm going to add a claim rule for the role claim, and select to get that claim from the attribute store. And my attribute store is the local Active Directory. And I have to specify an LDAP parameter that I want to use. And token groups will return me exactly what I want, a list of Active Directory group membership. And I can apply that policy, and everything should be set to go. So I'm going to go back to the Contoso server and go back to my web application. That's going to take a little while to load since it has to recompile because of the config changes. And then it's going to redirect to the Contoso STS and do integrated auth there. So then the Contoso STS can create a SAML token, sign that, put the claims in it, encrypt it, and pass it back. All right, so here we are with our web application. We've kept the name of the user here, but it looks like Terry's lost their administrator privileges. All right, and the reason this happened is because this is a beta, and there's a change that we need to make. So currently, when you auth to an ASP.NET web page using integrated auth, isEnroll is populated by the Active Directory group names that has the domain name in front of them. So I want to comment that out and replace it with just the exact same group names, but without the domain name there. And now I'll go back to my application and refresh. All the information is still on the token, so I don't need to request a new token. And Terry has their admin privileges back. So that's how simple it is just to get an existing application up and running using the Geneva server STS.
Cool. OK. That is pretty cool, isn't it? So we went from an ordinary ASP.NET web application. You saw the fed-util tool that generated the metadata for the application and consumed the metadata from the STS. We went to the admin tool for the STS. We finished the handshake. We introduced them to each other. We created a claims transform, which took the information out of AD groups and fed it into the role claim. Inside the Geneva framework at the application, we take that role claim and we populate role-based security in ASP.NET. So if you wrote your application, assuming integrated auth, using role-based security, you can put it with an STS, you can attach it to an STS, externalize authentication to the STS without making any code changes. Again, what Caleb said, all fed-util did was change the web config. It didn't change any of the code in the application. That wasn't until he had to go in and do that one little thing. There's that one code change. But that code change won't exist in the future. So we'll speak in the future tense here. No code changes by the time it ships at RTM. And then we also have this wonderful capability here where now it's up to the STS to decide where to get the role claim. You saw the rule that Caleb wrote there was one where we were taking it out of the AD groups so that the application would get exactly what it was getting before. But maybe you want to be more sophisticated. Maybe you want to draw the role values out of other attributes in AD. Or maybe in future versions of our server, draw the role values out of other stores, other databases, for example, all without having to think about that in the application code. So the STS is giving us that level of indirection and taking the heavy lifting of the identity work out of the code. All right, so that was simple. We didn't have to make any code change. But let's say you have an application that actually wants to know more about the user. And most applications do want to know more about the user than just what's their name and what groups are they a member of. What's your email address? Where are you in the organizational hierarchy? All this information, the application today, most applications have to go look up somehow. As it turns out, it's not absolutely straightforward to do that. If you're a corporate line of business application developer, you're building custom applications for an enterprise, then you have to go find someone who knows where in the information system to get that information. How do I know if this user is a manager? just looking in the Active Directory might not tell you the answer. You might have to go somewhere else, SAP, another database that's authoritative about that information. Querying those databases may or may not be possible for you. You may not be allowed to touch that database. You may not be allowed to read from that particular directory. If you're an ISV, you have this problem in spades. You don't know where the user is keeping this, or your customer is keeping this information. It could be anywhere. And you're forced then to figure out some workaround which is going to cause custom integration necessary to get your application deployed. This problem only gets more interesting with the advent of the cloud. The forecast calls for cloud services this afternoon. Many of them. It's getting cloudier and cloudier. Can you feel it? And your application's running up in the cloud. How is it going to reach back into your customer's Active Directory and get that information? Across how many firewalls is that? It's just not something that you would normally think is possible. So we're going to need a new way to get at this information. The claims-based model lets us assume that the user has got the information from the security token server and is presenting it in terms of claims to the application. And you're probably wondering, well, how do I actually get at that information then in the application code? Caleb, would you care to show us that?
Oh, absolutely. So, all right, so we're back at this inventory app page where the welcome message is, Contoso whack Terry. You see it a lot of times in enterprise applications because that's the information that's easy to get. Not the most friendly information, but it's what's easy to get. So let's make a change so that we can have something a little more welcoming. That message is being created right here in the display name. So what I'm going to do is comment out just using the name, and I'm going to add accessing the claims identity object. All right, my IntelliSenses are tingling here. It doesn't look like I have my definition, so I'm going to add the namespaces from the Geneva framework. Okay, and that looks better. So same as above, we're accessing iPrincipal identity, but now we're casting it as an iClaims identity. Off of iClaims identity, there's a claims collection. This is just an array of claims. You can access like any array. I'm accessing it with a link statement and querying for the given name claim type. And then right below here, I'm querying for the last name claim type. And then I return the two values combined. And you could really, it's the exact same for any claim values you might want. Email address. And I should tell you, in our hands-on lab, it's really the same setup. So if you want to go in and experiment and do different things, I really encourage you to do it. It's fun to play with. And I go back to the web application, refresh. And I get the first name and last name from the user in the welcome message.
Cool. That was easy. Easy? So easy you didn't even notice, right? It's too easy. We've made it too easy. It's a darn shame. Okay, so we saw the iClaims principal and iClaims identity classes that we've added. And they're very familiar. If you're familiar with iPrincipal, iIdentity, iClaims principal, and iIdentity are going to make a lot of sense to you. And we're able to get at that bag of claims that has been delivered in the security token that the STS was responsible for looking up. Now, on one hand, I love this stuff. On the other hand, I worked on Active Directory for the better part of 10 years. And it's hard for me to say, you don't need to query Active Directory anymore. It's hard. It's hard for me to say that. Anybody here ever done that in their app? Anybody? Anybody? Did you remember to query on an indexed attribute? I mean, there are these things that are, you have to know a little bit about LDAP and AD. And here, you don't have to know that. It's there for you. The STS, the guy who runs the STS, luckily, the IT pro who cares deeply, deeply about the health and welfare of the AD, is the one who's deciding how to get that information in the best possible way. You get it on a platter inside the application. Federation. I want to be able to enable users from other organizations to be able to come in and access my application. This started happening many years ago. I don't know if you've run into this. Probably you have. Your application might be deployed in an enterprise, and you've got the employees who are accessing it, but it's literally a nanosecond later, you've got some other user from somewhere else who now needs to get access to that application. And that problem is now dealt with in some workaround, typically sort of custom, sort of expensive workaround by the IT staff at that company. It's only, again, going to get more challenging with the advent of the cloud. I have my application. It's running up in the cloud. I want users from all kinds of enterprises or organizations to be able to come up and access that application. But I don't want to have to run a user store for all of those users, nor do my customers want to have to manage extra user accounts for every cloud service that they're about to use. That would just be back to the 80s sort of thing, where I've got all these different silos of identity, and I'm trying to manage them all by hand. Federation is going to allow us to get past that and have a single sign-on experience. Let's take a look at our demo. We have Terry at Contoso Hybrid. We're going to introduce a new player at Fabricam, Mr. Frank Miller, the laid-back kind of guy. And we're going to show here now how Frank is going to get single sign-on access to the Autoparts web application without having to write a single new line of code.
This time really without having to write a line of code.
Yeah, this time really, yeah. No caveat on this one. Here we go. Caleb, show us Federation.
So our application already trusts our Contoso STS. So now it's just a matter of configuring policy at the Contoso STS to trust the Fabricam STS. So I'm at the Contoso Management Console, and I want to add a trust relationship with an identity provider, with the Fabricam identity provider. So I add identity provider, brings up the wizard. This is the similar experience as before, where we specify the metadata endpoint that we're going to get the metadata about Fabricam from. It's retrieving the endpoint information and the certificate. It's a lot easier than going the manual route. There was that second option there. Friendly name, so I can identify the policy. And I can see what claims they offer. Looks pretty good. They don't offer role, which is what I want, but they have group, which has the same functionality. So I'll fix that up after the fact. Apply the policy. And now I want to fix up that rule so that I can provide a role claim for the Fabricam users as well. I go to the properties on my front-end application, the claims tab, add a rule. I want to produce a role claim again. This time, instead of pulling it from the local Active Directory store, I'm pulling it from the incoming token. So I want to do a claims transformation by claim type. So I'm saying create a claim from a different claim. And that source claim is going to be a group claim. OK, so that's all the configuration on the Contoso STS side. I'm going to switch over to the Fabricam STS and configure Contoso as a relying party, since now it's relying on the tokens that are being produced by Fabricam. Familiar experience here with a metadata URL. Retrieve all the information about the Contoso STS. Provide a friendly name. And I have a chance here where I can review which information is going to be requested, so I know what's going to be submitted to the Federation partner. And apply those changes. OK, so that's it. The application's hooked up. I'm on the Fabricam server, so I can access the app from our laid-back friend, Frank. Open up the parts application. And this time what's going to happen is when I hit the application, I get a redirect to the Contoso Security Token Service, which is what this page is right here. I'm accessing Contoso Security Token Service from outside the corporate environment. And now Contoso knows about two identity providers, itself, Contoso, and Fabricam. So it has to ask the user, where are you coming from? So I'm from Fabricam, so I select that, sign in, and now I'm redirected to the Fabricam Security Token Service. And that token gets created, encrypted for the Contoso service, posted back, and then it bubbles back to our web application. And you can see that it's still customized with the user's name. That came from the Fabricam Active Directory. And that the purchasing privileges also flew through so that he still had his role information maintained. And he can start shopping for great hybrid parts.
Cool. No code. Not that time. Okay, what did we just see? Again, it's the same model as when we brought the auto parts application on board. We did an exchange of metadata to establish a trust relationship, but this time between two STSs. That's how we create a federation. Now, those of you who are familiar with first-generation federation products will remember that creating a federation was typing a lot of URIs and picking certificates, and it was a little bit error-prone because it was the manual nature of it, and getting things up and running was not easy. What you just saw there was an innovation that we've been working on with others in industry to allow trusts to be bootstrapped through this metadata, and then also to allow those trusts to be self-maintained over time. So, for example, when the certificates are about to expire, we have an automatic robot that will be able to come back and refresh those certificates, update all the partners, keep everything going so that you don't have to look at it again. By the way, that robot that does the updates isn't in the beta, but we do have the metadata part, so you can see how easy it is to do a trust setup. And all you have to do then, by the way, is just dial the certificate lifetimes up past how long it's going to take for us to ship, and you'll never have to worry about the robot. Anyway, that's what we do. So then Frank went to visit the application. He attempted the access. He's not authenticated yet. He got redirected to the Geneva server. There he had to go through this step, this new step that happens in all federation scenarios. Because I'm not authenticated, and if you could have come from a variety of places, I now need to ask Frank, where are you from? We call this the home realm discovery step. Frank helps the Geneva STS decide where he's from. That gets him redirected to his STS. He did an integrated auth. There was a blink. You probably didn't notice it. If you try this yourself at home, turn up your volume, and you can hear security happening as the browser's clicking through the URLs. You authenticate. Claims come back to Frank in a form which has a post in it that's going to post that security token back up to the Contoso STS, which gives another set of claims transformed. We took the group claim, we turned it into the role claim because we knew that's what auto parts wanted. And then finally post that set of claims back, and voila, we're in the application. Single sign-on by Frank on the other side. And that's the basic federation flow. Now, one of the things that, federation, great. A lot of people have been talking about federation for a while, business-to-business scenarios. Cloud services scenarios are going to make this only more important. But there's another scenario that comes to mind when I talk to folks about this, and that's the simple case of, have you ever been asked, how well or how does your application work if I have more than one Active Directory forest? Anybody had that problem before? Anybody? Anybody? Few? Okay, a couple. It's in there. These technologies are specifically designed to help you cross these organizational barriers, and they exist within corporations and enterprises and organizations as much as they exist between. The larger the organization gets, the more chance you're going to find this case. So this technology is not only applicable in what you might think the B2B federation scenario is, but also even within corporations and organizations. Now, there was one complication, if you will, one extra added step that made that experience by Frank a little different than the experience by Terry, and that was that where are you from step. And maybe there's something that we can do to make that where are you from step a little bit easier for the users to get through. I've talked to customers who tell me, you know, I have users who just aren't going to be able to figure that out. When they see that drop-down, and if that drop-down has more than 2 values in it, they're not going to be able to get past it. Or if you ask them to do something else like enter your email address, maybe they'll be able to get by that. But what we really need to do is change the game on this experience. So we've got Frank. Frank's going to access the auto parts application, but now he's going to have a new rich experience on the client, Windows CardSpace Geneva, that's going to help him navigate this federation. What Caleb's going to do now is show us how easy it is to wire up CardSpace and see the experience that Frank is going to have for that. All right?
All right. So we're back on Frank's machine, and his administrator has configured information cards in the Geneva STS. So he needs to go to a website to download his cards. And this website is going to be backed by client SSL, because one of the cards he's going to download is a certificate-backed card. So the certificate dialog comes up. He's picking his cert. The certificate is protected by a password. You know, really, this would probably be a smart card, so you can imagine this is where you'd enter your PIN for your smart card. And then he comes to the card download page, and he's offered 2 cards. There's a high assurance card, and this is the one that's going to be backed by the certificate. And then there's a standard employee card as well, and this card uses just integrated Windows authentication. All right, now that Frank has his cards, he's ready to use them somewhere. There's a little bit of configuration that needs to be done on the Contoso security token service side so that it accepts information cards. So I'm going to move back over to the Contoso security token service. And then in the Geneva management console, go down to the web browser clients and select that I'd like to allow information cards for sign-in. Apply those changes. And that's it. That's all I need to do over here. So that's pretty easy. We can go back to Frank's machine and access the Contoso site again. So this time when the site comes up, you're going to see there's also the information card sign-in control. And when Frank clicks on this, it's going to bring up card space. Now this is card space Geneva, and it's built using the built-in Cred UI provider. Doesn't look quite as nice on server. It's a little cleaner on Vista. But he wants to use his first card here, the Fabricam employee card. There's this new option. He always wants to use the card at this site. So that sounds good. He's also interested in the information that's going to be sent to the site. So we can click on there. And now the token's being requested from the security token service, but it also contains a display token. And CardSpace will display the value, so Frank could review, if he wanted to, what information is going to be set to Contoso. All right, that looks all right. So he's going to OK it. Now the token goes to the Contoso STS. Exact same token comes to the web application, and everything just works. The application's CardSpace enabled.
Cool. Wait a minute. So that's it?
That's it.
That's it.
That was fast, huh?
All right, that was fast. All right. OK, so let's see. Hold on. Frank got some cards. And all you did was check a checkbox on the Contoso STS side.
Oh, you have to apply the changes,
You have to apply the changes.
Yeah.
OK, so there was 2 steps there. OK, it's that easy. So let's take a look at what happened. We have the trust set up already. We're going to see the steps that actually happened in the flow so that you know what happened. We did the same thing. Frank tried to access the auto parts application. He wasn't authenticated yet. He was redirected to the Geneva server. Instead of doing the where are you from dance, he clicked that button that was the CardSpace logon button. And when he did that, that activated CardSpace. It activated CardSpace because an object tag in the page caused Internet Explorer to call CardSpace. And that object tag contained in it that policy information on what claims are needed. Remember, if you remember the essential flow, I can read from the STS, what claims do I need to get a token from you? CardSpace then takes care of going to the Geneva STS, reading the policy, going to the Geneva STS, authenticating, getting claims, and eventually sending those back to the Geneva server in exchange for a new security token, which it finally gives back to Internet Explorer. And then Internet Explorer posts that up to the site where the Geneva framework consumes it. So it's the same pattern, but instead of being what we call the passive pattern, where the browser is simply getting redirected, the browser is now calling a rich client app, if you will, rich client component, CardSpace, and there's really only one interesting API on that rich client component, and that's called getToken, go figure. And you pass in the policy that you want to satisfy, and out comes a token after CardSpace figures out, hey, I've got to go all over here to these STSs, get these tokens, these claims, authenticate the user, prompt them to show their certificates, da-da-da-da, eventually getting the token back to the application, in this case, Internet Explorer. So that wasn't that hard to set up, but we think we can make that scenario even easier. Imagine, if you will, in a subsequent beta, these are things we're considering, and we'd like to get your feedback on them, that Frank didn't have to go get those cards. Let's just figure out a way to push those cards to Frank's machine so that he has to figure out how to go get them. And then another thing that we can do is imagine that when Frank went and saw that logon button and he clicked it, and the policy was fed into card space. The card space could say, hey, my administrator told me that if I'm going to this place, if I'm trying to get a token to this place for this app, don't bother prompting the user to pick a card. Use exactly this card. Don't prompt for anything. Just go get it and keep going. So that the experience that Frank will have is click and he's in. So those are two things that we're thinking about that we believe can make that experience even easier. So he doesn't even have to check that, don't always send this card checkbox. We can take him completely out of the loop of the experience. And that would be something that would be very difficult to do if we were just purely relying on the browser and those redirects. There's not much, because we call it the passive client because it's not actively involved in the protocol. It's simply being directed around. Okay, scenario number 4. 4 or 5, we're almost there. This is where I start getting a little tired. All right, identity delegation. Identity delegation is an interesting problem. So we have this web front end. Web front end wants to call a web service backend. We want to preserve the user's identity as we go through to the web backend. A lot of different ways people do this today. Number 1, you know what? I'll just gather the user's credentials at the front end. Give me your name and password, trust me. I'm not going to abuse these things despite the fact that now you can be me. You have my essential credential. Well, that's probably not the best approach. Well, it's an approach. It carries some risk. Another approach is, hey, I'm the front end, and I'm going to have godlike access to the back end, and I'm only going to let the user who comes in do exactly what they are allowed to do. Trust me, I'll encode that into the front end application, what the rules are. We call that the trusted subsystem approach. It gives the front end a lot of power again, this time in the application, and maybe more power than we're willing to give it. It also makes it difficult to audit the user all the way through to the back end because the user that's accessing the back end is the identity of the front end, not the actual user. Now, there are protocols that know how to do this. Kerberos, for example. Kerberos constrained delegation. Maybe some of you have used that before. The problem with Kerberos is it only works with Kerberos. So if you are trying to branch into a system that does something differently, or, heaven forbid again, it's one of these cloud service applications. I want to access a backend that lives in the cloud. Am I going to be able to get Kerberos to work out into the cloud or back from the cloud and down into my organization? That's difficult to imagine getting all that wired up today. So we have a new approach that follows the claims-based model. Let me walk you through it very briefly. I've got Frank. Frank is over at Fabricam. He's going to access the front end, and then the front end is going to act as, the front end is going to access the back end acting as Frank. Here's the way the flow works. First, Frank has to go and get redirected, get a security token. And finally, he's able to get to the web front end, gives the claims to it. By the way, another advantage of something like CardSpace is that it can do caching of tokens, so that on every visit we don't need to do this, or we don't have to worry about people clearing their cookie cache, because in the passive protocol we use cookies to try to maintain session state, etc. But in the active case, we can be a little more smart about that. I've given the token to the web front end. The web front end now wants to make the call. It needs a token acting as Frank, and it's going to get one from the security token server by asking for a token in a very specific way. It's going to say, hi, I'm front end, or auto parts. I'm auto parts. Frank is visiting me. Here's his token. I would like a token acting as Frank for the back end. At that point, the Geneva server can do the following evaluation. OK, I see it's Frank. I see it's the front end. I see it's auto parts. It's the high-value inventory service that auto parts wants to access. My policy says that's OK. So I'm going to mint a token for the front end. And by the way, I'm going to mint a brand new token with new claims in it. It doesn't have to be the same set of claims that Frank presented when he originally visited the front end. And chances are the back end does want a completely different set of claims about Frank. The back end, if this were we're really taking SOA here, the back end was written by someone else sometime else. There was no coordination between the people who built the front end and the back end. But because we have this wonderful impedance matching capability of the STS, we can get by this. And finally, the web front end has a token, and it simply presents it to the back end in the same manner that any client would present to the web service a security token. All right, so here we are. We've got Frank. Frank's going to access the auto parts front end, and then it is going to call through to the high-value inventory web service. Caleb, show us identity delegation.
All right,
please.
so the first thing I'm going to do is copy in a few files just to make things faster. If you do the hands-on lab, you can look at the files yourselves. There's not that many changes. It's basically you just go through and uncomment little bits of code. What I will show you is the web config, just to show you that it's a standard WCF application that has the endpoints defined for the security token service as well as the back-end service. So that's just all in here. This is standard WCF stuff. So what's going to happen is this front-end service is going to call the back-end service, which is a high inventory application, or high-value inventory application. So we've separated it out from the front end so that it's not exposed, to the extranet, and it's really just through the front end that people can access it, or someone internally could access it through a rich client. It's the same web service interface. All right, so I've made those changes, and I need to fire up our inventory service, which is just this console window. And now I'm going to switch back over to Frank's machine so that he can access the application again. And once he does this, he'll be able to view the high-value items that get pulled into him from the high-value inventory service. Now, a little compiling, since we made those code changes. Use the card. So you can see here that his card's appearing in page. This is another piece of card space Geneva, which is an ActiveX control. We call it the card tile. And it shows which card was previously used at the site to help build context for the user and make it easier for them. And then also, since Frank checked the Remember Me option last time, it's just going to be a single-click sign-in. No picking cards or selecting things from the drop-down box. So he gets the token, and he's into the application. OK, down here is the Show High-Value Items link. So we'll click that to make the call, and it goes back and connects to that service. And I have access denied accessing the service. So this is expected. This is good, because we don't want just any front-end service to be able to act as an incoming user. We want to configure the policy on the Contoso STS. So I'll switch over and open up the management console on Contoso. Go back to the relying party policies and this auto parts policy that we configured. Open up the properties. There's a delegation tab here. I'll check that I want this to be able to trust, that I want this application to be able to do delegation. Now I have a choice. I either want it to be able to delegate to just any other web service, or I can constrain it to specific web services. So I'm just going to let it access that inventory service and make those changes. And then I'll go back to Frank's machine and try and access the high-value inventory again. So I'll just back up and click on the Show High-Value Items link. And then I'll be able to see all the high-value items. All right. Now I'm going to switch back really quickly to the application machine and look at our service, because I'm printing out the claims of the caller. So you can see up here are Frank's claims values. So this is just going to look like standard claims coming into the service. So if it has logic to process these claims, nothing needs to change on the web service side. But then there's also claim information describing who's actually making the call. So if the backend service cared, it could tell that this was actually a delegated call and have some other auditing or authorization decision. All right.
Cool. Identity delegation. I missed that demo screen. All right, yeah, that's also pretty cool. Now, if you're familiar with WCF, we also do all the magic so that you don't have to know how to go get the act as token. We provide a new way to set up the channel. What is it called again? There's a word for it, and it's escaping me, and Caleb is giving me a blank stare. So, but when you set up the channel, you just need to say you're going to set up the channel acting as, and we will be able to figure out where to go to get the token, what tokens to supply for the bootstrap. It's all taken care of. So if you know how to do WCF, it's very natural to then use this model, the identity delegation model, to access the back-end web service. Now, this reminds me of another story of a customer I've been talking to about this technology. It's an internal group inside Microsoft that's building a line of business application, a very important one. I'm not going to talk about it in a lot of detail today. But I was in this meeting, and I was talking to some folks, some architects and developers who are going to be working on this project. They were taking this line of business application, re-engineering it to be web services, SOA, factoring it into different pieces. And they thought they were going to have to build their own STS, and they thought they were going to have to build it with plain old WCF. And they hadn't heard of us yet, and through a chance meeting of a set of people, since our project has been kept fairly quiet, through a chance meeting, we hooked up with these folks. So I'm in this meeting, and there's, 10 people in the room, and we're talking, and they're very happy. And we're like, okay, let's set up a joint agreement. Let's go forward and use this technology. And as I walked out, I was talking to someone, and a fellow walked up who was in the room. And there were a couple of people in the room that I didn't recognize, and I didn't recognize who they were when they introduced themselves either. And I wasn't really sure why they were there. And the fellow said, hi, I'm from IT security. And I'm really bullish about this technology you're working on because everyone and their brother in IT is doing something a little bit different to solve this identity delegation problem. And I know it's about to become my problem in about a year, how all these things are divergent and have very different security characteristics. So boy, it would be lovely if everyone simply standardized on what you were doing, and then we would have one consistent way to think about this, one consistent policy model, one consistent identity model. And I thought, oh, that's good. I like that too. That's very good. Very promising. We could be on the right track here. Oh, we'll have to hold the questions for the end because we're pressed for time here, and I have one more demo. All right. One more demo. Strong authentication. Strong authentication is a topic I'm seeing a lot in various industry verticals, healthcare, finance, some areas of government, where there are certain operations that people want to be able to do in an application that are much more sensitive than most of the applications, or most of the operations that users want to do in those applications. And today, you've got one option, which is, well, I'll just force everyone to log in initially with a smart card to my application, and then I've got to give everyone a smart card, even if they don't have to do this particular sensitive operation. Or I can try to bury in my application some specific logic about how, in this case, if you're doing this and you're this user, then you need to present me with a one-time password or a smart card or something. And as it turns out, strong authentication also isn't just, and remember, I'm in the persona of the person writing the application. It's more than just, was it an asymmetric key cryptography? It's how did the user get the key? Were they in-person proofed? If I leave a stack of smart cards on this desk later, is that strong authentication if you can come and grab one and then access my application? Absolutely not. It's a function of both the business process, the provision of the credential, which could be something very intricate involving, and many different means of knowing who you are, really who you are, and the strength of the crypto that was used and how susceptible it is to attacks. So if you're an individual application developer, you don't want to have to think about any of this. And this is a prime example of how we will take the heavy lifting of this operation out of the application and put it into the STS. So now we have Frank. Frank is going to visit the auto parts application, but instead of when he goes to the inventory web service, just being able to get into it, we're going to stop him and make him show a stronger credential. Caleb, take it away.
Okay. Well, again, I'm going to copy in just a couple files you can take a look at in the hands-on lab if you want. I'll show you probably the most interesting part of it, which is really how we're telling, that Frank hasn't authenticated with a certificate previously, that he's just coming in with Windows authentication. And how we're doing that, this should look familiar. This is basically the claims query that we did for the first name, last name when we customized the display name. We're using the iClaims principle and looking at the claims property, and we're checking for authentication method URI. And in the SAML token, this is an authentication strength assertion, and it says how the user was authenticated. And then we do a comparison against that value with URIs that we know map to certificate authentication. So if they use certificate authentication, we return true, they've been strongly authenticated. Otherwise, we return false. And another part of the logic prompts the user to then re-authenticate with a certificate. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to being Frank and re-access this application. Open up Contoso. So I'm going to do this twice. I'm going to do it first with the WSFed passive model, selecting Fabricam from the drop-down box. So I'll log into Fabricam, and this uses integrated authentication at the security token service that I'm redirected to, and then I'm logged back on to the web parts site. When I click on Show Value Items, that bit of code that I showed you runs. It sees that I didn't authenticate with a certificate, redirects me to this page, and I click on the Use Strong Authentication link, posts me back to the Contoso STS page. This time there's a query parameter, which is part of WS Federation, WAuth, that describes the security requirements of this page. So now when I go to the Contoso application, so when I select Fabricam, I'm instead prompted for a certificate instead of getting the integrated auth redirect. So I pick my certificate, type in my password, and get signed on to the application and have access to the high-value inventory items. All right, so now I'm going to do that exact same flow, but showing how it looks if the user had used card space instead. So I open up the application, and this time I'm going to just click in again using my integrated auth card. I get signed in and go to see the high-value items. Same W param is going to get passed back to the Contoso STS. And then I click on, oh, sorry, wrong one. So I go up to card space. You can see that my card's not showing up here anymore. That's because the use of the showing the last card is really mapped off of the policy that's being requested. And there's a request here for a certificate claim type from the card. And that's really, a temporary workaround, part of the beta. But because of that, I have to configure policy on the Fabricam STS to return a value for the certificate claim type. This claim type isn't actually used or processed by the RP application, so it doesn't matter what value I specify here. And like I said, this is just a temporary measure, so I'm just going to return display name. And this will enable policy so that when that claim type is specified in the web page, that we'll still be able to return a token. So I click on the information card icon. I'm only shown the high-value assurance card since that's what maps to the claim type that I requested. And I can submit that card. Now this card's backed by the certificate, so I get that same certificate dialog. Enter my password and get a token, and I'm signed on to the page and can see the high-value items. That's how you have it working both with the Fed passive and the card space scenarios.
Cool. Okay, that was the last part of our demo. Could you please join me in thanking Caleb for building all of that and bring it up here?
Thanks, Stuart.
Sir? All right, let's sit down now. All right, so that was the authentication assurance. There's lots of different things we can carry in claims, not just information about the user, but metadata about the way they've authenticated. We can expect that in application code. In the future, what we want to be able to do is have ways of doing this entirely declaratively in config so that you don't have to write that code. You can just say this page, this authentication type, take care of bouncing the user out, and don't let them back in until they have the right authentication strength. So you saw an ASP.NET web application, no code changes, almost no code changes, to wire it up to an STS, get information about the user without a lookup, enable access through federated users, access a backend preserving the user's identity, and then requiring strong authentication only for access to specific resources. Now, you might be wondering, where can I get this? How do I get this? What are the terms of my getting this? The beta is available now. It just got posted this morning. Microsoft.com/Geneva. Easy to remember. You can go get the stuff. We've got an SDK, examples, this entire lab that you just saw, written out in a document so you can reproduce everything here yourself. We give you all the code for the application so you can try it. We'll have another beta in the first half of calendar next year, and we'll release the final versions of this software in the second half of next year. That beta in the first half of the year, we anticipate being feature complete. Now is a good time to come tell us about the features that you want so that we can incorporate them in the next development milestone. You don't need to pay anything. We don't need to pay anything additional for Geneva. It's a Windows component. All the pieces are Windows components. You or your customer can get it if you have Windows. The beta runs on Windows Server 2008 and Vista. The final supported platforms have not yet been decided. That's another thing that you can give us feedback on, and that we will take your counsel. And we have several people from the Federated Identity team here. We've got a big booth downstairs in the pavilion. Please come talk to us. Try out the scenario in the hands-on lab. Find out if you're interested in our Technology Adoption Partner Program. Please come tell us about your scenarios, and we'll see if we can plug you into that program. And just to get to the end, we have lots of other scenarios that drill down deeply. If you want to know what's going on inside that framework, what's going on inside the server, how did we re-engineer card space to make it so fast and slick as you just saw. You can see those presentations here this week. But finally, what do you do in computer science when you've got a lot of things that look similar and have similar capability and you want to use all of them, but you don't want to be bound to any one of them? You add a level of indirection. That level of indirection we call claims-based identity and the identity metasystem. The Geneva offering layers on top of the existing investments customers have made into Active Directory, X509, SAML, and provides ways of leveraging that infrastructure in a technology-neutral way when you're building your applications. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to talking to you through the rest of the week. Thank you. And I have 10 minutes for questions. Please go to the microphone if you have a question. Caleb, why don't you come on back up? Go ahead. Oh. There you go.
How is this functionality different than what's been available in the Liberty Alliance?
So the Liberty Alliance technologies are primarily oriented around the SAML protocol. The SAML protocol is something that we also support now in Geneva. I went past that point pretty quickly in the presentation. Probably the primary difference here is there's an active protocol and a passive protocol associated with these WSTAR protocols, whereas the suite of protocols in Liberty has been mainly focused on the passive suite. They also have some active components. They don't line up exactly the same way as the WSTAR ones. But we are having a lot of ongoing conversations with members of the Liberty Alliance about how we can harmonize the two architectural sets, because there is a lot of similarity between them. And one of the things that we've done recently is that metadata that I showed, or that Caleb showed in the trust setup, is actually a harmonized set of metadata between SAML and between WS Federation. So we're actually hoping that there can be quite a bit of convergence here so that we can all get to that one model around claims.
All right. Thank you.
Go ahead, here.
I saw you download the card space 2 to the local machine. What do you have as far as a story with respect to portable card space cards from machine to machine?
So that's a very popular question with card space. If I have these cards and they're on my PC, how do I get them to other PCs? Roaming is a feature that is not in this first beta, but it's something that's very important for our second beta. We're looking at a variety of different ways of doing this. One is sort of high-level speaking, a cloud-based way of putting cards up into the sky, and then when you go to various machines, being able to pull them down or use them directly out of the sky. Another way is by moving your cards around on a device, maybe a USB combo smart card storage mechanism, or maybe a mobile phone. So those are a variety of different ways we're looking at. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do all of them in this next release of card space, but we do know that if we don't have a solution to the roaming problem, then it makes it very difficult for users to use card space in a broad way. So it's something that we are really going to attack.
Thank you.
What is an information card? Is it a certificate or something different?
So the information card is metadata about the relationship the user has with the security token service. So this is the way the flow works. User wants to access an application. The application has a policy associated with it that says, you need to get me these claims from one of these issuers. The user can read that and hand it to CardSpace, and then what CardSpace does is it looks at the cards the user has and finds a matching card that can satisfy that policy. So here's the policy. I've got all these cards. This card matches. and it embodies the relationship between the user and the STS to get a token from it.
And the card is a certificate?
No, well, the card is signed, but it is not a credential. It does not have a key associated with it. It's signed metadata that says, here's a pointer to an STS that you can get a token from that will have these characteristics.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. I just wanted to confirm about the earlier identity session. Geneva servers look like an upgrade from, this services connector, Active Directory service connector. But it's still free, right? I wanted to confirm.
It is a Windows component, and if you own Windows, you can have Geneva no extra cost.
Okay. Next question. That was, I forgot now. Oh, yeah, about the RTM dates. Are we looking at the same RTM date both for Geneva Framework and Geneva Server?
Yes, we're looking at having all three components released simultaneously. That's subject to change, but since the Geneva Server is built on the Geneva Framework, we probably will keep them all in the same train, the same set of betas, and the same release date.
Thank you for listening.
Okay.
What about high availability for the STS?
So the STS is basically a set of web services and web servers, and we will provide a way of putting them behind load balancers and farming them so that you can have the traditional scale-out model for services and web apps.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Right, when are you looking to support a different repository other than Active Directory? Say a custom one.
So that's actually a very interesting question. We're almost certain that we have to support more than Active Directory by the time we get to that release at the end of next year or in the second half of next year. We're not exactly sure how we're going to do that yet. We've got a variety of choices, and it will depend on the set of requirements that we get from customers. One choice is we'll let you get it AD, and we'll let you get it SQL, and we'll make it really, really easy to do that. Another way that we could do this that will cast a wider net is we'll give you a way of plugging your code into the pipeline of the server, and you can go look anywhere. Maybe you want to go look in some very specialized database or set of files or network equipment. One of the scenarios that I really love is this idea of an STS emitting location claims about where you are in the network. You're not going to be able to get that data out of Active Directory, for example. So we're looking at those two options, and right now we're debating which direction we should go. So if you have a particular business scenario in mind, please come down to our booth and talk to someone there who's wearing one of these green shirts, and we'll get that encoded so that we can weigh it against our decision.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the client component in the Geneva Framework, are you going to make that available to Silverlight also?
So
from the managed runtime perspective.
If you want to, so you can call Windows card space from Silverlight, if that's one way to get a token.
Right.
There are a variety of other ways that we're looking at getting tokens within Silverlight, maybe purely just with script. And there's another option here, which is there is a trust client, if you will, WS Trust client that's inside our framework, and we'll look at various ways that we could maybe port that up into the Silverlight environment. We don't have any, I don't have any particular news to give you on that, but it is something that we're very, very interested in doing. Okay. Other questions? Do you have a question there at the back? No? Go ahead.
In the identity delegation, is it possible to go to SQL Server, to the data tier?
Very good. In fact, I glossed over another point in the slides. Today, SQL that you can buy doesn't know how to interpret claims, for example. One of the things we're very interested in is working with the SQL team so that they can natively interpret claims. In the meanwhile, we're providing a service that comes with the framework that can take an inbound token and turn it back into a Windows NT context, so that if within your environment you're using claims and eventually you need to now junction outside of the claims world and go back into the Windows world, you can get a delegatable Kerberos identity and go back into the database. And that's a scenario that, with a bunch of the people that we've been working with, has been very important because many of these multi-tier apps eventually get back into the data layer. So that's what we'll do for now, and then we're working with the SQL team to see when and if it's appropriate to support claims natively inside their stack. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of the PDC.